Hello, everyone. Welcome to the final session of the three-part series that we have going on gerunds and infinitives. Hopefully, the other two have been very, very insightful, and this one should be a lot more since we're going to contrast gerunds and infinitives. So make sure that you're comfortable and you're hydrated so you can absorb all this wonderful knowledge that we have for you. All right, without any further ado, let's get to it. So, first, we're going to recap a little bit since we can use both of them for subjects, we're going to start with gerunds, okay? So we already established this in the gerund video that we can use them as a subject of a sentence. And here we have three examples, okay? So analyze these examples, read them, and see what you think. They sound correct, right? They sound all right. They sound like something any person would say, something that you would say yourself. And that's because, well, they are correct. What we have here is what people would call everyday English. This is what a normal person says. This is what like it says any person will use in any casual conversation, right? And they are 100% correct. So that is gerunds. Now, we also established that infinitives can also be used as the subject of a sentence. And here we have some examples. We mentioned in that video, in the infinitive video, that this sounds a little bit like Shakespeare. If you don't believe me, read the first sentence, right? To be or not to be, that is the question. A very famous Shakespeare quote. And actually, the second sentence here is also from Shakespeare's work. So this, if you pay attention to it, it doesn't sound like everyday English. That's because it's not everyday English. This is a lot more formal. This sounds poetic, even. And this is exactly it. It's something that we wouldn't normally use in everyday speech. Pretty sure some of you already identified that. If it sounds a little bit not so common to your ear, that's because of this. It is more something that you would use when you want to write poetry, literature, and stuff of that nature. Okay? So, just to recap, we can use both infinitives and gerunds as the subject of a sentence. However, gerunds are much more commonly used. Okay? And you just have to pay attention to what you want to project in your sentence. If you want to project more of a poetic sound to the sentence, well, then go for the using an infinitive as the subject. But if you want to use everyday common English, well, then go for the gerund as the subject. And now we arrive to the next point, which is we can use both gerunds and infinitives as the object of a sentence. And we have the first sentence here that says, I enjoy drawing. Now, that is perfectly correct, right? And I can also say a sentence like this one. Yesterday, I decided to draw. So in these two sentences, we're using either gerunds or infinitives as the objects, and they are both perfect. No, there are no mistakes there. So how can I tell when to use one over the other one? How am I going to know if I'm making mistakes here? Well, it's very simple. We have to make sure that we pay attention to the verb that precedes the object, or in this case, the gerund or the infinitive. What verb is before it? And that is basically going to tell us which one we have to use. Why? Because some verbs are going to require us to use either a gerund or an infinitive immediately after. Okay? And don't worry, I got you covered. Here is a list of verbs that need to be followed by an infinitive. Okay? So this is a long, well, not so long list, but it has several verbs there. And it has some with numbers and some without numbers. What does that mean? Well, basically, the ones without the numbers are the ones that need to be followed by an infinitive. The ones that have numbers, though, well, those have a little bit more characteristics to them. And we're going to need the number code right here to actually be able to understand them a little bit more. So, like, for example, the ones that have number 8, these verbs are followed by an infinitive, or they can also be followed by an optional noun and an infinitive. What does this mean? Well, let's take the verb ask, for example. This one has the number 8, right? So it falls under that category. Well, it's because I can say, I asked her to make the call, right? You guys see that I'm putting the noun her right after asked, and then I'm adding the infinitive to call. I asked her to call. So that is what this means. It's just basically telling you the structure that you need to follow. Or you can also say, I asked to call my mom. I asked to call. So in this case, I have the verb, and right after I have the infinitive. So this just gives you a little bit more of play with the verb, that you can also add a noun in between and then the infinitive. It doesn't need to always be followed only by an infinitive. And the other two, number 13 and 14, we did cover them in previous videos. I am going to explain though, don't worry. For example, number 13 is the one where you can use either a gerund or an infinitive, and as an object, obviously. And there will be a difference in the meaning of the sentence. Okay, there will be a difference in the meaning of the sentence. I don't know if you guys remember, we had an example with remember. I don't know if you guys remember. So the example with remember said, he remembered to send the fax. That was one of the sentences. And then the other one was, he remembered sending the fax. So if you guys analyze both sentences, they don't mean the same thing. In one, he's remembering the action of sending the fax, like, oh, I remember this one time that I sent the fax, right? He remembered sending the fax. And then the other one, he remembered to send the fax. He remembers like, oh, I have to send the fax. I'll be right back. Let me go send it. So they have different meanings, but you can use either an infinitive or a gerund. And 14 is the one that talks about we can use either a gerund or an infinitive, and there is little to no difference in the meaning. Okay. For example, we have love. If I say I love to play video games, or if I say I love playing video games, do you guys hear a difference in both sentences? If you say no, then yeah, I mean, there is basically no difference in the sentences. The message is the same one, and that is number 14. With the verbs that have number 14, you can use either option, and it's basically the same thing. Okay. Now we're gonna go to the next one, which is gonna focus obviously now on gerunds. So this is a list of verbs that need to be followed by a gerund. The same reasoning falls behind this as we were using for the other one, for the other list of verbs. If we have verbs that don't have a number, they need to be followed by a gerund. Okay. However, we do have a number code again. In this case, we have number 9, which was not in the previous list. This is a different one. And this one talks about, we're going to follow it by a gerund or by a noun and then an infinitive. Okay. So this applies the same way the other one applied, where we added a noun and then the infinitive. Okay. So it's the same structure that we talked about in the previous one. And then 13 and 14, again, same things that we already mentioned in the previous slide. 13 means that we can use either a gerund or an infinitive, and the meaning is going to change. It will change. And then 14 means that we can use both gerunds or infinitives, but the meaning is not going to change. Okay. Not going to go too much into examples here, since we already explained the other one. You might want to review the other part of the video if you need the explanation there. All right. So we move on to number 4. Number 4 says that infinitive should be used after many adjectives. Okay, let's see some of these example sentences that we have there. And you guys can see we have the adjectives underlined, and what we're using right after them is an infinitive. And yeah, so if we're using adjectives and we want to add either an infinitive or a gerund right after, we need to use infinitives, not gerunds. Okay, and let's read one of them. It is not easy to graduate from university. This is going to be the correct one. Okay. If we use gerund, what is going to happen? Well, it's going to be incorrect, like it says right there. Okay. Next one. Number 5 says that only infinitives are used after certain verbs, followed by nouns or pronouns referring to a person. So this might sound a bit confusing to you guys, but again, it just has to It has to do with the structure that we're following. So as you can see right there, we asked her not to go. So it's the same thing that we saw in the list of verbs, where we had a pronoun right after the verb, and then we had the infinitive. So you can see right there, we have the verb, we have in this case, the pronoun or the noun right there, her, and then we have the infinitive, to go. So it's basically just explaining how we have the structure, and if we follow it, if we have a noun or a pronoun referring to a person, we are going to use an infinitive, right? Number, oh yeah, I forgot this one. So you're gonna have to study the verbs that take an object and an infinitive of the context. Okay, make sure that you study these rules when you're gonna apply them, especially when you're working on the project. If you don't follow the rules, or if you're not looking at them while you're making your sentences, you might fall and make a lot of mistakes while you're making your text. So make sure that you are following the rules. So here we have more examples. Okay, this is basically working on with the same rule that we mentioned in the previous one. And as you guys can see, we have a lot of different verbs: ask, expect, hire, invite, order, remind, require, etc. Right? And we're following the same structure that we just mentioned. We have the verb, then we have a noun or a pronoun, and then we have what? The infinitive. Yeah, you guessed it. So here we have again expected, which is the verb. We have a noun or pronoun right there in him, and then we have the infinitive right after. And if you guys choose whichever you want, if you want tell, all right, let's go to tell. We have the verb told, then we have the noun or pronoun, and then we have the infinitive. So again, this just goes to show you what I mentioned in the previous slide, which is talking about the same thing. This is just following that structure that it mentions. It mentions the verb plus noun or pronoun, and then obviously the infinitive. Okay. All righty. So going on to the next one. Only gerunds are used after prepositions, with one exception. But let's not talk about the exception just yet. Let's just analyze this example. It says, I talked him out of taking that job. So we have the preposition of, and after that preposition, if you're thinking about, am I going to use a gerund or an infinitive? Well, the answer is going to be, we're going to use a gerund, because only gerunds are used after prepositions. Okay. Here we have a little bit more examples of what we follow them by. For example, a preposition that follows a noun. Here we have the preposition about, and it's right after the noun novels. Here we have another example. We have the preposition in, which is right after the noun interest. Now we have a preposition that follows a pronoun. So we have the pronoun you, and then the preposition for. What are we using right after that? Well, we're using, yeah, you guessed it, a gerund. We can use that also after a preposition that follows a verb. Here we have the verb thinking and the preposition about. What are we using right after? Yeah, you guessed it, the gerund trying. And the last one that we have here is that we can use, we have a preposition that follows an adjective. So we have the adjective weary, and then we have up. We have the other example right there, the last one. We have scared, and then we have the preposition again of, and yes, followed by the gerund. So again, this is just giving you some more examples of what prepositions are gonna follow, and then you using the gerund right after that. Okay. We talked about the exception, or we mentioned that there was one exception. What is that exception? Well, here it is. The exception is but. Okay. So but is going to be the only exception that we are going to have. But it is not any but, okay? So it's only when but is used as a preposition, not when we're using it as a fanboy, for example, okay? Only when we're using it as a preposition. And when we use that as a preposition, we have to remember that the meaning of but is except. Here we have an example. I had no choice but to follow her. So I had no choice except to follow her. Okay. So this is the only exception to the rule about prepositions. So this is the only time that we're going to use a gerund. Here you have, I mean, an infinitive, sorry, instead of the gerund. Here you guys can see we're using the infinitive to follow instead of following. Okay. We have another one right here. Mary made no stops on the way except to get gas. So yeah, we are seeing how we can use but and we can use except right there. And again, right after, we're going to use the infinitive. So this is basically another example. There you go. But this is all the same thing. When we use but as, like we mentioned, as a preposition, then that is when we are gonna, well, we're not gonna use a gerund. We're gonna have to use an infinitive in that case, right? So that was the last rule that we have. Now we're just gonna recap. Here we go. A little bit about the differences between infinitives and gerunds, just so you guys have a solid view of all of them at the end. So we have that infinitives take the base form of a verb and we add to, right? Infinitives are used as nouns, adjectives, and adverbs. Yeah, they have 3 different usages, which is a lot. And infinitives as a subject sound poetic. We have to remember Shakespeare. That's always gonna, if you get that to stick in your brain, you're not gonna make that much of a mistake when using them. And for gerunds, we have that we add the ing. Yeah, we add ing to the verb. The gerunds are only nouns. Okay, so infinitives have a lot more flexibility when it comes to usage, but gerunds are only nouns. And then lastly, gerunds as a subject sound more natural and normal in many sentences. So like we mentioned everyday English. Please remember that will be in the exam. Everyday English is for gerunds and more poetic or Shakespeare-like is for infinitives. And then lastly, just remember, when being used as objects, you have to look at the list of verbs to know which one we have to use, if we're going to use a gerund or an infinitive. I really suggest this, and I don't want anybody trying to guess or trying to make a sentence without looking at the list or at the rules from the presentation. All right, this is just to make sure that nobody makes mistakes. But that is it. We reached the end of the presentation. I'm going to skip over here because I do want to show you. Yeah, I want to show you the sources. There we go. These are the sources. So make sure that if you do have any questions, you can go also visit them, those websites. However, I did compile most information from there. There might be a lot more information there. However, it will not be in the exam. So you just want to focus on the one that I placed there for you. And yeah, that's basically it. Make sure that you practice it. A lot of these more specific rules are going to be in the exam. Hopefully that wasn't too long. Tried to keep it a little bit shorter, but I mean, it is what it is. I'm sorry, guys. Hope this helped you out a lot and it wasn't too boring for you guys. Remember, any questions, bring them to the classroom and I will be more than happy to help you out with them and hopefully get you to understand anything that you didn't already. All right. See you. Take care. Have a wonderful day, wonderful night, and peace.